7. Evidence for rebirth, exploring the scientific and personal accounts of past lives. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and debated topics in Buddhism, rebirth. Many people are skeptical about the idea of rebirth, considering it to be a superstition or an outdated belief system. But what if I told you that there is real evidence, supported by scientific studies and documented cases, that suggests rebirth might not be just a myth? In this video, we'll explore the concept of rebirth and examine some of the scientific evidence that has been collected over the years. We'll look at documented cases of children who recall past lives with astonishing accuracy and the research conducted by scholars like Professor Ian Stevenson, who spent years studying these phenomena. By the end of this video, you might start to see rebirth in a new light, not as something to dismiss, but as a reality that deserves deeper exploration. What is rebirth? Before we get into the evidence, let's quickly review what we mean by rebirth in the context of Buddhism. In simple terms, rebirth refers to the idea that after death, our consciousness does not simply cease to exist, but instead continues on in a new form. This is not the same as reincarnation, where a soul is said to pass from one body to another. Rather, in Buddhism, it's understood that our consciousness, shaped by karma, our actions, thoughts, and intentions, transfers into a new life. This concept of rebirth is central to the Buddhist understanding of samsara, the continuous cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, which is driven by karma. Our actions in one life influence the nature of the next life, creating a continuity of consciousness that transcends the physical body. Ultimately, the goal is to break free from samsara and attain nirvana, where the cycle of rebirth ceases. Now, while the idea of rebirth might sound fantastical to some, there are many documented cases and scientific studies that suggest it's more than just a belief system. Let's explore these pieces of evidence that support the theory of rebirth. Case studies of children who recall past lives. One of the most compelling forms of evidence for rebirth comes from children who, at an early age, recall detailed memories of past lives. These children, sometimes as young as 2 or 3 years old, start speaking about events, places, and people they have never encountered in their current life. What makes these stories particularly intriguing is the accuracy and consistency of the details they provide, often with no prior exposure to the information. Example: the case of Shanti Devi. One of the most famous cases comes from India, involving a girl named Shanti Devi. At the age of 4, Shanti began speaking about a past life in a town called Mathura, which was hundreds of miles away from her home in Delhi. She described in vivid detail the house she lived in, the people she knew, and the circumstances of her death. What makes Shanti's case so compelling is that many of the details she described were verified by investigators who found that a woman named Luji had died in Mathura, exactly as Shanti described. Shanti's memories were so accurate that a team of researchers, led by a prominent scholar, investigated her case. They even brought Shanti to meet the family members of her past life, and she recognized them immediately, identifying them by name and relationship. Her story challenged the conventional understanding of life and death, offering a direct account of what might be remembered from a past life. Personal reflection: when I first heard about Shanti Devi's story, I was deeply moved. It's easy to dismiss such cases as coincidence or imagination, But when so many details are consistently verified, it's hard to ignore the possibility that there is something more going on here than simple fantasy. This case, along with many others, made me realize that there's so much about consciousness and existence that we still don't understand. Could it be that our memories of past lives are hidden within us, waiting to resurface? Example, the case of James Leininger. Another fascinating case comes from the United States, involving a young boy named James Leininger. James began having vivid dreams about a past life as a fighter pilot during World War II. He often described his old life in great detail, even mentioning specific events and locations that he had never been taught about. His parents were initially skeptical but became convinced when James began recalling the names of aircraft and military jargon that a child of his age would have had no way of knowing. As the Leiningers began to investigate, they discovered that there had indeed been a fighter pilot named James Houston Jr. who had been shot down in the Pacific during World War II, exactly as James Leininger had described. The details James provided, such as the type of plane and the circumstances of the crash, were later confirmed by historical records, making it difficult to dismiss the possibility that this child was recalling memories from a past life. Scientific research by Professor Ian Stevenson. Perhaps the most well-known researcher in this field is Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist and professor at the University of Virginia. Stevenson dedicated over 40 years of his life to studying cases of children who claimed to remember past lives. He investigated hundreds of cases from around the world, collecting detailed evidence and compiling his findings into books like 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. Dr. Stevenson's research followed a rigorous methodology. He would interview the children, their families, and anyone who might have corroborated their memories. In many cases, Stevenson found that the children's memories were not only accurate, but that they could be verified through facts and historical records. These cases involved children who were able to recall names, locations, and specific events that were later confirmed to be true. One of the key findings of Dr. Stevenson's research was that many of the children's memories involved details of their past lives that were not commonly known, even in their families or communities. This suggests that the memories were not simply learned or fabricated, but rather were authentic recollections of past experiences. Personal insight. What really strikes me about Stevenson's work is how open he was to exploring these phenomena without jumping to conclusions. He approached each case with a scientific mindset, looking for empirical evidence and staying open to the possibility that what he was observing might challenge existing paradigms. His research challenges the conventional view that consciousness is entirely tied to the physical body and opens up new possibilities for understanding life, death, and rebirth. Skepticism and challenges. While these cases provide compelling evidence, many people remain skeptical about the concept of rebirth. Critics often argue that the children's memories could be the result of coincidence, suggestion, or even the child's imagination. Some skeptics believe that the children might have heard stories or seen movies that influenced their recollections. Others claim that the details of the children's memories are either too vague to be verifiable or that they can be explained by psychological phenomena like false memories or confabulation. Additionally, some have questioned the methodology of researchers like Dr. Stevenson, arguing that the evidence is anecdotal and not based on controlled experiments. This is a fair critique, and it's important to approach these cases with a healthy dose of skepticism. However, What makes these cases particularly interesting is the consistency and verifiability of the details provided by the children. Many of these stories cannot easily be explained by simple coincidence or imagination. Personal transformation and the importance of rebirth. While scientific evidence can offer fascinating insights, the real value of understanding rebirth in Buddhism lies not in proving the phenomenon, but in how it can transform our lives. The idea that our actions, thoughts, and intentions have consequences beyond this life encourages us to live more consciously and with greater responsibility. Rebirth and karma remind us that our choices matter. Every thought we think, every word we speak, and every action we take leaves an imprint on our consciousness, not just for this life but for future ones as well. This understanding can inspire us to lead more compassionate and ethical lives, knowing that the good we do today may ripple into the future, bringing us peace and happiness. Example story: I once met a woman who had lived a difficult life, filled with hardship and challenges. Despite everything, she had managed to cultivate incredible patience and kindness, even toward those who had wronged her. When I asked her how she remained so calm and compassionate, she told me that she believed that the struggles she faced were the result of past actions, but that she also knew that by acting with compassion and wisdom in this life, she could create a better future for herself and others. Her outlook was a powerful reminder that, even in the face of adversity, we have the power to change the course. 8. Scientific perspectives on rebirth, bridging science and spirituality in Buddhism. In today's video, we'll explore an exciting intersection of science and spirituality, the scientific perspectives on rebirth. While rebirth is a central concept in Buddhism, many may wonder how it aligns with modern scientific thought. Is there room for the idea of consciousness continuing after death within the framework of science? Interestingly, there are notable scientists who have acknowledged the possibility of reincarnation or rebirth, aligning it with scientific principles. Figures like Thomas Huxley, Gustav Stromberg, and Julian Huxley have explored the idea of consciousness continuing beyond the physical body in ways that resonate with Buddhist teachings. They have compared this concept to something as modern and scientific as wireless communication, suggesting that consciousness, like a message, may continue after death in a new form. In this video, we'll dive into the views of these pioneering scientists and examine how their ideas challenge and expand our understanding of consciousness and rebirth. We'll also explore the broader implications of their perspectives on our own lives and spiritual practices. Rebirth and science, a surprising alignment. For many, the idea of reincarnation or rebirth seems like something from ancient spiritual traditions, disconnected from the rational world of science. Yet, as we'll see today, some scientists have found ways to reconcile the concept of rebirth with scientific principles, particularly in relation to the nature of consciousness. At the heart of these discussions is a central question: what happens to consciousness after death? In Buddhism, we believe that consciousness continues to evolve and that rebirth is the result of our actions, intentions, and karma. But could modern science also entertain this idea? The answer might surprise you. Thomas Huxley, the evolutionary thinker. Let's begin with Thomas Huxley, a prominent 19th-century English biologist who is often referred to as Darwin's bulldog for his strong defense of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. Huxley was a committed rationalist and a staunch advocate for scientific thinking. However, Despite his scientific skepticism towards supernatural claims, Huxley acknowledged that the idea of reincarnation could hold scientific merit. Huxley famously wrote about the potential of the continuity of the human spirit and consciousness. While he didn't embrace reincarnation in the traditional religious sense, he recognized that the evolution of life might include the persistence of consciousness beyond the physical body. This perspective, though not fully aligned with Buddhist teachings, shares an openness to the possibility that consciousness may be more than just a product of the brain. In one of his famous works, Evolution and Ethics, Huxley suggested that the continuity of life, much like the continuity of energy in the universe, might include the persistence of consciousness. This idea hints at a broader, more interconnected view of existence, one that aligns with the idea of rebirth. Personal reflection: I find it fascinating that a scientist like Huxley, who was so deeply involved in the study of evolution, would entertain the idea of consciousness existing beyond the physical body. For me, it reinforces the notion that science and spirituality are not always opposing forces. In fact, when approached with an open mind, they can sometimes complement each other, providing us with a more holistic view of life and consciousness. Gustav Stromberg, the astronomer who saw consciousness as energy. Next, we turn to Gustav Stromberg, a renowned Swedish astronomer and physicist. Stromberg was a contemporary of Albert Einstein and a close associate of the famous scientist. Despite his deep commitment to the study of the physical universe, Stromberg did not dismiss the possibility of consciousness continuing after death. Stromberg's views on the nature of consciousness were influenced by his understanding of energy and the cosmos. He believed that just as energy cannot be destroyed, consciousness, too, might persist beyond the body. In a similar vein to the laws of thermodynamics, which state that energy cannot be created or destroyed but merely changes form, Stromberg proposed that consciousness could continue in new forms after death, transitioning into a new existence. In his writings, Stromberg drew parallels between consciousness and energy, emphasizing that both could be part of a larger, ongoing process of transformation. This idea echoes the Buddhist understanding of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, where consciousness moves from one life to the next, shaped by our actions and karma. Personal insight: Stromberg's analogy of consciousness as energy is a powerful one. It reminds me that nothing in the universe exists in isolation, everything is interconnected and constantly changing. Just as energy flows and transforms, perhaps consciousness, too, flows through different states of being. This view opens up a fascinating dialogue between scientific principles and the Buddhist idea of the continuity of consciousness. Julian Huxley, the philosopher of consciousness and rebirth. Julian Huxley, the grandson of Thomas Huxley, was not only a prominent biologist and philosopher but also a strong advocate for the potential of human consciousness to evolve and transcend the limitations of the physical body. As the first Director General of UNESCO, Huxley's work spanned many disciplines, including ethics, evolution, and the exploration of human consciousness. Julian Huxley took his grandfather's openness to the persistence of consciousness a step further. In his later works, he suggested that consciousness might transcend the physical body and continue in ways that science had yet to fully comprehend. His views on the evolution of consciousness were deeply influenced by his understanding of both biology and spirituality. Huxley believed that, Just as human beings had evolved from simpler forms of life, there was a potential for human consciousness to evolve toward greater understanding and enlightenment. In his book Evolution and Ethics, Julian Huxley discussed the potential for consciousness to transcend the physical body in ways that are not yet fully understood by science. While he did not explicitly endorse reincarnation in a religious sense, he acknowledged that the evolution of consciousness could potentially involve continuity beyond the individual life. Story example: a key personal story that resonated with me was about a friend who, after a difficult loss, found solace in the idea that consciousness is not confined to the physical body. While initially skeptical, he started exploring the concept of rebirth and past lives as a way to understand the deeper meaning behind his grief. He found comfort in the idea that his loved one's consciousness might continue in another form, and this perspective helped him heal emotionally. Julian Huxley's philosophical exploration of consciousness gave my friend the language to frame his personal experience, allowing him to reconcile grief with a sense of continuity and connection. Consciousness and wireless communication, a modern analogy. Perhaps one of the most striking analogies made by these scientists, and one that particularly resonates with me, is the comparison of consciousness to wireless communication. Just as a wireless message is transmitted from one point to another without the need for a physical connection, consciousness may move from one life to another, unbound by the limitations of the physical body. This analogy has powerful implications. It suggests that consciousness is not just a product of the brain or the body, but something that exists beyond the physical realm, much like how wireless signals exist in the ether, invisible yet real. In Buddhism, we view consciousness as not being tied to any one life or form, and the idea of consciousness as a form of communication transmitted through time and space aligns closely with Buddhist teachings on rebirth. Personal reflection: I love this analogy of consciousness being like a wireless message. It makes me think about how our thoughts, emotions, and actions are like signals that carry meaning far beyond our immediate experience. In the same way that wireless communication connects people over vast distances, our consciousness, too, might transcend the limitations of our current existence and continue on, shaping and being shaped by future lives. Implications of scientific perspectives on rebirth. The views of scientists like Thomas Huxley, Gustav Stromberg, and Julian Huxley provide an intriguing lens through which we can explore the concept of rebirth. While these scientists did not necessarily claim to have definitive proof of reincarnation, their openness to the possibility of consciousness continuing beyond death offers an exciting convergence between science and spirituality. For me, this convergence is incredibly meaningful. It challenges the idea that science and spirituality are at odds with each other. Instead, it suggests that both realms of knowledge may be complementary, offering different ways of understanding the same fundamental truths about the nature of existence. Story example: I once had a conversation with a colleague who was a devout atheist. He was deeply skeptical about anything related to the supernatural or spiritual. However, after discussing the scientific perspectives on consciousness and rebirth, he became intrigued by the idea that consciousness could transcend the physical body. In today's video, this conversation will explore an exciting intersection of science and spirituality, mindfulness meditation as a way of understanding his own mind. While rebirth is a central reminder that science, Many may wonder how it aligns with modern scientific thought, can often lead us to spiritual for the idea of personal growth continuing after death within the framework of science and consciousness. A unified Interestingly, there are notable scientists who have acknowledged the possibility of reincarnation by thinkers like Thomas Huxley with scientific principles, and Julian Huxley invite us to reconsider the nature of consciousness and the possibility of its continuity after the idea of consciousness continuing beyond the physical body in ways that resonate with science and spirituality. They have compared that this concept of knowledge may ultimately be pointing to as wireless communication. Consciousness is not bound by the limitations of the physical body, and may continue beyond a new form. For those of us practicing, we'll dive into the views of these pioneering scientists and examine how their ideas challenge and expand our understanding of consciousness. May not yet have all the answers. It will also explore the broader implications of their perspectives and on our own lives and spiritual practices. 9. The importance of rebirth in Buddhism, a path to spiritual growth and nirvana. In today's video, we're going to explore a profound and vital aspect of Buddhism, rebirth, and why it holds such an important place in the Buddhist spiritual path. One of the central beliefs in Buddhism is that if we don't attain nirvana in this life, we are given another opportunity to continue our spiritual journey in future lives. This process of rebirth allows us to learn from past mistakes, overcome our limitations, and move closer to enlightenment. But what does this really mean for our everyday lives? How does understanding rebirth affect the way we view our actions, our struggles, and our spiritual progress? In this video, I'll share my thoughts on the importance of rebirth in Buddhism, the lessons we can learn through multiple lives, and how this view can inspire us to live more mindfully and with purpose. Rebirth, the cycle of samsara and spiritual growth. To understand the importance of rebirth in Buddhism, it's essential to first grasp the concept of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. According to Buddhist teachings, all beings are caught in this endless cycle of samsara, driven by our attachments, ignorance, and karma. The ultimate goal of Buddhism is to break free from samsara and attain nirvana, a state of liberation, peace, and enlightenment where suffering ceases. However, achieving nirvana is not something that typically happens in a single lifetime. The process of spiritual growth and enlightenment requires time, effort, and the overcoming of countless attachments, desires, and mistaken views. In Buddhism, we recognize that it's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to attain complete enlightenment in just one lifetime. This is where the concept of rebirth comes in. It offers us a second, third, or even many opportunities to continue our spiritual journey, learn from our mistakes, and progress toward enlightenment. Personal insight: I often reflect on how this idea of rebirth is so compassionate. It gives us the chance to grow without the pressure of feeling like we have to achieve everything in one lifetime. The idea that we are not bound to one fleeting existence but can take as many chances as needed to reach nirvana is incredibly liberating. It helps me let go of the fear of failure and instead focus on what I can learn from my actions today. The role of karma in rebirth. One key element in the process of rebirth is karma. In Buddhist philosophy, karma refers to the law of cause and effect, how our actions, intentions, and thoughts shape our present and future lives. The karma we accumulate in one life influences the conditions of our next life, which means that the way we live today has a direct impact on our future existence. Karma can be positive or negative, depending on the intentions behind our actions. Positive actions, motivated by compassion, wisdom, and kindness, lead to favorable conditions in the next life, potentially placing us in a situation where we can continue our spiritual development. Negative actions, on the other hand, driven by greed, anger, and ignorance, can lead to suffering and difficult circumstances in future lives. This is why Buddhism emphasizes the importance of ethical living. By cultivating good karma, we can improve our chances of being reborn in a more favorable environment where we can continue working toward nirvana. The compassionate nature of rebirth. Buddhism teaches that rebirth is not a punishment but rather an opportunity for continued growth. It is a compassionate process that gives us the time and space we need to work through our attachments, negative emotions, and misunderstandings. Rather than seeing rebirth as a burden, it's helpful to view it as a gift, an opportunity to refine our minds, understand our mistakes, and evolve toward greater wisdom and peace. Let's consider the example of a person who, in their current life, struggles with deep anger and resentment. They may not be able to overcome these negative emotions in a single lifetime, but through rebirth, they have the opportunity to be born into a life where they can continue learning to let go of anger, develop patience, and cultivate compassion. Each new life provides the chance to continue working through past mistakes and grow spiritually. Story example: there's a famous Buddhist story about a monk named Angulimala, who was once a notorious bandit. He had killed many people, accumulating an enormous amount of negative karma. However, through an encounter with the Buddha, Angulimala had a profound realization and began to practice the Dharma. Despite his past, he changed his actions and eventually became a monk, dedicating his life to meditation and spiritual practice. His story illustrates how even the most troubled individuals can use rebirth as an opportunity to transform their lives. It shows that no matter the depth of our mistakes, we always have the chance to start anew in the next life, provided we continue our efforts to grow spiritually. Learning from past mistakes. One of the most important aspects of rebirth is the opportunity to learn from past mistakes. The Buddha taught that we are not bound by our past actions forever. While karma shapes the conditions of our future lives, we have the power to change our course by cultivating positive actions, thoughts, and intentions. Rebirth is, in a sense, a way to give us more time to practice and evolve. As we move from one life to the next, our consciousness carries with it the lessons and tendencies from our past experiences. This means that if we have struggled with certain issues in one life such as attachment, hatred, or ignorance, we will have the chance to address these challenges in future lives. By practicing mindfulness, meditation, and ethical living, we can purify our karma, overcome negative mental habits, and move closer to enlightenment. Personal insight: I often think of the idea of learning from past mistakes in the context of my own life. I've certainly faced challenges and made mistakes, and sometimes it can feel like a never-ending cycle. But the concept of rebirth offers a fresh perspective. Rather than being stuck in my past mistakes, I can view each new day, each new moment, as an opportunity to learn, grow, and do better. It encourages me to approach life with a sense of patience and hope, knowing that I am always evolving. Rebirth as a path to greater understanding. Rebirth also provides an opportunity for deeper understanding and spiritual wisdom. Each lifetime offers us the chance to refine our mental faculties and approach life with greater clarity. While we may not achieve full enlightenment in one lifetime, every life offers new lessons that bring us closer to the realization of truth. This process of spiritual evolution over multiple lifetimes is one of the most profound aspects of the Buddhist path. It teaches us that the journey to enlightenment is not a race but a gradual unfolding of wisdom. It reminds us that there's no need to rush. Each life is a stepping stone toward greater understanding, compassion, and peace. Practical implications of rebirth in our daily lives. Understanding the importance of rebirth in Buddhism can have a profound effect on the way we live our daily lives. When we recognize that we have the opportunity to continue our spiritual journey in future lives, it encourages us to live with greater mindfulness and intentionality. We begin to see our actions not just as isolated events, but as part of a much larger continuum of existence. For example, when we practice patience and compassion in our current life, we are creating positive karma that will carry over into future lives. We are not only improving our present circumstances but also laying the foundation for future spiritual growth. This understanding can help us approach our lives with more care and attention, knowing that every moment counts and every action matters. Story example: there's a story about a man who was known for being extremely selfish and greedy throughout his life. He hoarded his wealth and never shared anything with others. As he grew older, he began to realize the emptiness of his life and felt regret for his actions. At the time of his death, he vowed to be more generous in his next life. In his next incarnation, he was reborn in a family that was poor but had a great sense of community. He grew up to be a kind and generous person, always helping others and giving away his wealth. His story serves as an example of how the lessons from one life can be carried over into the next, allowing us to evolve and improve. Conclusion: rebirth as a spiritual gift. In conclusion, the concept of rebirth in Buddhism is not just about the continuation of life, it's about spiritual growth, transformation, and the opportunity to learn from past mistakes. Rebirth offers us a compassionate chance to continue our journey toward enlightenment, knowing that each life presents new opportunities for growth. It encourages us to live mindfully, ethically, and with a sense of purpose, knowing that our actions in this life will shape our future. Rebirth reminds us that we are not defined by our past but by the choices we make in the present. Every action, thought, and intention we have today shapes the life we will lead in the future. And most importantly, it offers us the hope that no matter how far we feel we may be from Nirvana, there is always another opportunity to continue our path toward enlightenment. As we wrap up today's discussion, we've seen that Buddhism offers a profound and compassionate view of life and death. Rebirth, driven by the continuous flow of consciousness and influenced by karma, provides us with endless opportunities to learn, grow, and ultimately transcend suffering. Each new life is a chance to refine ourselves, to move closer to Nirvana,